Okay, so let's move on. Do you guys know what jargon is, by the way? Next thing is jargon. So do you guys know what jargon actually refers to? Okay, so jargon is basically just technical language that's used by certain communities. So actual definition is like a technical sub-language used by specialists. Does anyone have any examples of jargon? Like any domains from which you can like get jargon or like use jargon? Yeah, medical. What else? That's the most obvious example, but yeah, what else do we have? Attorney, plaintiff, what's that? Yeah, legal jargon, yeah, business jargon, yeah, computer jargon. Yeah, so there's many different examples, right? So these are just some domains from which you can like find jargon, but it's basically just technical language that's used within these domains to refer to specific things, right? They have specific definitions. So for example, if I was to give you an example like medical jargon, right? I'll say like for example, um, like herniation or like uh intervertebral disc herniation, right? That's a jargon noun phrase. Also labeled with word class as well, but you can just call it jargon. This here is a very specific concept that's used by doctors to refer to like something that's happened with like the your spinal cord, right? And it has a very specific definition. Legal jargon, you can have, for example, like plaintiff, right? Or I don't know, like attorney. There's different examples. I'm not too good with law, but just some examples that you can use in like legal domains, right? Or computer jargon. So you can have like repository, right? Or LLM, right? Language learning model, like GPT. That's an example of jargon as well. So that's an example of like computer jargon. So that's like what I mean when I say jargon. It's technical language that's used by specialists within certain domains, right? So it's not used by everyone. That's the thing I want you like the guys to understand. It's not used by everyone. At least like not like most people, right? Unless you're like trying to like look like one of these specialists, you're not going to use jargon. You're going to use it if you're actually within that domain, like using it for like a specific purpose, right? So yeah, that's what jargon is pretty much. Now, what do you think jargon does? So what is the effect of using jargon? What are your thoughts?
It adds credibility.
Yeah, okay, so that's something you can link to. So you can say like it like establishes credibility. Right. So credibility just means like being trustworthy, people trusting you with something. So like a newspaper might want to like sound credible because they want people to like believe them and like trust them with what they're saying. So that's something you can link to. But what do you think is the immediate effect? What do you think is the immediate impact on the reader or the audience of using jargon? It's
It
pretty hard, I know, but like have a go.
a formal register.
Okay, that's something you can link to as well. So formal register. So remember, these things are things that you can link to. These are SLVs. I see that SLVs. So establishes credibility. That's a purpose. That's one of the purposes we can link to. Formal register, that's register. So that's also SLV. But the effect is your bridge between your main language, your jargon, and these SLVs. So what do you think it does? What's the immediate like surface level impact of using jargon? Have a think. So when you use jargon, what tone does it create? It makes you sound smart, doesn't it? So what you can say like it engenders, uh, or evokes, so like it induces an erudite tone. So erudite just means like smart or intellectual, right? So that's like your immediate effect. And then that erudite tone, right? That's tone of sounding smart. That in turn can be linked to broad ideas, these SLVs, like establishing credibility or creating that formal register. But very good. These are things that you can link to. Very, very good. They actually draw these things. But that's the ultimate link. You want to describe the effect in between. This is your bridge. This is your bridge between your main language and broad ideas. So what happens is that if you miss this bridge, if you miss this stylistic effect, if you miss the immediate effect, your teacher's going to say, oh, you didn't expand enough. Oh, you didn't elaborate enough. So that means you're missing out on this stylistic effect. You're missing out on the effect. So the students who like don't get that feedback, the students who like actually expand on the male language, they don't get the feedback of like, you know, you didn't expand enough on your features because they've actually explained the effect. So you're sort of showing the link between your meta language and your broader um, like idea. What happens is that sometimes if you just go from meta language to SLV without your immediate effect in between, then it might get a bit confusing. And the teacher is going to say, "Oh, you skipped the step. Oh, you're jumping between like you're jumping conclusions, right? You're going from like meta language to like this concept without actually explaining how it happens." So the immediate effect is like the how. How does it link to credibility? How does it link to formal register? So it's very, very important that you get good at describing it. But yeah, at this age in time, I'm actually not expecting you guys to get good at like, like writing effects because you're early days. But yeah, by the end of this year and by the end of next year as well, you should be really, really good at describing the effect of a male language term. You should be able to very expressively and fluently describe what a male language does, what an example does. And it's going to really, really help you a lot with your elaborations in ACs, SAQs, essays as well, all sections. But yeah, in terms of what you can link it to, so what can you link uh, jargon to in terms of like SLVs. So I think you guys already pointed it out. So you can link it to things like establishing credibility. So the purpose of credibility, or like establishing expertise, or even authority as well. The main thing is expertise, by the way. Right? And even formal register. So it makes the register more formal. It makes it more professional. And even tenor as well. Right? So the tenor is basically linked to register. So I'll sort of indent it here. I'll include it as part of register. But yeah, tenor as well. It creates a professional tenor, right? Or even, right, an asymmetrical tenor as well. Why do I say asymmetrical? Why do you think it might create an asymmetrical tenor or an imbalanced tenor? Tenor is
Because,
basically the relationship. So we kind of covered it in a previous lesson, but yeah, tenor is basically the relationship between two interlocutors, or like the author or audience. So what are your thoughts? Why do you think you might do that?
because the author is more knowledgeable than the reader.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one person said in the chat as well. That's exactly right. So the idea is if someone's like really, really smart and they're using jargon and they're talking to like an everyday person, then the everyday person is not going to understand what that actually mean. So if you have a doctor using like terms like this and talking to a patient, the patient's going to have no idea what the doctor's referring to. So it creates an asymmetrical tenor. It gives the doctor like this subtle sort of power over the patient, and it can even like obfuscate the patient. It can even like, confuse the patient. So yeah, that's why you can even say like the tenor is asymmetrical as well, or imbalanced, right? Or hierarchical. It creates a hierarchy. So it's basically saying, "Oh, I know something that you don't." So yeah, that's the idea. But those are just some things I can link to. And you can even link to the purpose of like obfuscating. But yeah, that's more of a Unit 3 area study 2 thing. Not expecting you guys to know it just yet. Are we all okay with this? So like what the effect is and what you can link it to? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's move on to slang. So slang, if I want to like teach it to you guys in like one sentence, is basically the informal version of jargon. So it's like jargon, except it's a lot more informal. So the actual definition is an informal sublanguage used within certain social cliques. So what do you think like some examples of slang? I mean, I know the first example is gonna be like Gen Z slang, right? I know you guys are gonna say that. But outside of that, what else? You have like sports slang. So for example, cricket slang as well, right? What else do we have? Colloquial slang. So colloquial slang is like not really specific to a domain. So slang is something that's like specific to a certain social clique. So what are some examples of like social cliques or social groups or communities? You can even say Australian slang, right? So Chokuyui, that's the example of Australian slang. It's used by Australians as like one social group. So remember with slang and jargon, right? So when it comes to slang and jargon, very important note, it's always specific to a subgroup of society. I want you guys to really like note this down, specific to a subgroup of society. So jargon can be specific to medical domains, so medical jargon, legal jargon, business jargon, computer jargon. Even slang as well. So slang that's specific to like Gen Z people or Gen Alpha people, right? Cricket slang, slang that's used by cricket players. Australian slang, slang that's used by Australians in general. So do you see how it's like specific to a domain, specific to a social clique or like a specialist community? Depends on like whether it's jargon or slang. That's the idea, right? So for Gen Z, it's like you have like things like 6-7 or like Riz or things like that, right? Cricket slang, screamer, that means like a really good catch. Australian slang, things like for example, like what else do you have? There's so many examples. Like Donny is an example of like Australian slang, right? But do you see how these are specific to communities? They're not like general things. They're more like specific to like certain groups. And that's what defines slang and jargon. They're specific to a subgroup of society. And slang is informal, jargon is formal and technical. Are we all okay with that? Is that all good? Okay, perfect. So yeah, these are pretty similar. Like you can sort of link these together and think of this as like the informal version of jargon. All right, let's move on to elevated lexis. So elevated lexis, in a very simple way, it's basically just fancy words. So does anyone know any examples of elevated lexis by any chance? So it's fancy words to describe basic things or concepts. Okay, I'll give you an example. Abstruse. Does anyone know what abstruse means without searching it up? Okay, I'll give you a hint. The word abstruse itself is abstruse. Abstruse just means confusing or like hard to understand, right? Or like incomprehensible or vague, right? So it's kind of ironic because like abstruse is abstruse in itself, but yeah, like that's the idea here. Or like, for example, um, penchant. Does anyone know what penchant means? Penchant. So Australians have a penchant for like laid backness or larrikinism. You like something, yeah, basically. It's like a tendency to do something, right? What about peruse? Does anyone know what peruse means?
Read.
Yeah. So do you see how all these things refer to basic concepts? So abstruse just means confusing. Penchant just means a tendency like to like something or do something, right? Peruse just means read. You can just say confusing or tendency or read instead of using these fancy words. So the thing with elevated lexis is that it's a fancy way to describe something basic or like very like surface level that doesn't require like much technical knowledge to understand. So it's not technical in itself. That's what differentiates it from like jargon, right? So it's different to jargon because jargon is technical, right? Like if I was to give you, for example, like intervertebral disc herniation, that's something that like you can't describe in everyday like terms. Right? It refers to like a small puncture in the disc between your spinal cords, like within your spinal cord. So like that's like something that you can't describe in everyday terms, right? Without actually spelling it out and like defining it. So this is the example of jargon because it's technical. It has a very specific definition. It's used by specialists. Elevator Lexus, it's just fancy words that like artificially inflated and like sound very nice, but they describe basic things or concepts and they're not really technical. They don't have a specific definition, right? Like peruse is like just a fancy way to say read. You don't need to be like a specialist to know what peruse actually refers to. It just means read. Penchant just means like a tendency, like something you like, right? You can't like it's not specific, it's not technical in any way. And it can be used by anyone. Like every Australian, any person can use these terms because they refer to basic things. Right. So yeah, very, very different to jargon because jargon is technical. Elevator Lexis is just like you trying to sound smart when it's actually just basic stuff. Okay, are we all okay with Elevator Lexis?